in the heart of Jerusalem, where the echo of the Torah resounded among ancient stones and the men of the law determined the fate of the righteous and the heretics. There lived a man who walked between two worlds and did not fully belong to either. He was not an apostle, not a prophet. He performed no signs, nor gathered crowds, but his words, few thoughtful, almost always spoken in silence, prevented executions, opened doors that were about to close, and rescued the name of Jesus from death before the most feared Sanhedrin of his time. His name Gamaliel, called a teacher, feared as a Pharisee, forgotten as a man, and yet indispensable to the origin of the church. But who was in fact this man who dared to challenge the supreme council of Israel with a simple "let them be"? Why does his name, after a brief record in the scriptures, plunge into disconcerting silence? And what happened to him after Paul, his own disciple, began to preach the name the Sanhedrin had condemned? Was Gamaliel an accomplice or secretly converted? Could he be a missing link between Pharisaic Judaism and the message of the gospel? And what do the forgotten manuscripts, rabbinic fragments, and echoes of the Talmud truly reveal about his end? Before we dive into this story filled with tension, faith, and silence, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so that none of the forgotten voices of Scripture go unnoticed by you. Now then, get ready to uncover the hidden truth behind Gamaliel's remarkable journey. Honor your father and your mother so that your days may be long. Exodus 20:12. The sound of sandals on cold marble echoed through the halls of Hillel's school. Gamaliel, in simple robes and a sparse beard, followed the steps of men who, though still young, spoke like masters. His eyes sought his grandfather's gaze, but Hillel remained firm, his face sculpted by decades of wisdom and renunciation. Every word he spoke was heard as though descending from Mount C. "Hear, O Israel," he repeated, teaching the Torah in a low yet piercing voice. "The Lord is one." Gamaliel watched him with fascination and burden. He didn't know if what moved him was admiration or fear. The name Hillel carried such great authority that even heaven seemed to bow when he rose. And there was the grandson, still unsure, trying to breathe under the weight of a name he had not chosen. That morning Hillel had called him to sit among the elders. The matter was delicate. The growing tension with the followers of Shemi's school. The tone of the debates was becoming increasingly harsh. Gamaliel listened but did not speak. An inner doubt consumed him, the same one that had followed him since childhood. Did he truly have a voice among those men, or had he merely inherited a name while his grandfather spoke of compassion, justice, and balance? Gamaliel observed the glances exchanged by other rabbis. Not all were allies. Some saw Hillel as overly lenient, almost too tolerant. Others feared the old master would leave the Sanhedrin vulnerable in turbulent times. At sunset, walking alone among the outer walls of the temple, Gamaliel was approached by a scribe. "Your grandfather is light," the man said, "but even light needs someone to carry it forward." Words that sounded like a blessing but stung like a charge. That same evening Hillel called him aside. The elder's eyes were tired but steady. "Yours will not be an easy path, Gamaliel. Truth requires silence at times. Other times it requires confrontation, but it always demands purity." Gamaliel tried to speak but swallowed his own insecurity. His heart burned with questions, but none escaped his lips. "Your name is not your shield. It is your cross." Returning to his quarters, he lay down without sleeping. On the stone ceiling, shadows danced with the flame of the lamp. He imagined himself speaking in the Sanhedrin, imagined disagreeing with his grandfather, imagined making mistakes, but the scene that frightened him most was the one where no one listened to him. In the early morning, he rose, rolled up a small piece of leather, and began to write. It was the first time he dared record his own thoughts. "Lord, if you made me be born of Hillel's lineage, do not let me die in Hillel's shadow. Give me your voice, even if it costs me men." The sky was still dark when he washed, dressed, and walked toward the temple. For the first time, he entered the courtyard. Of the masters alone, the guards asked nothing. He carried no arrogance, but something new, perhaps faith, perhaps fire. He knew that from that day on he would no longer walk as Hillel's grandson, but as even if he still didn't know what that meant. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Psalm 89-14. The lament echoed through the temple walls. Hillel had died. His body was carried in silence through the alleys of Jerusalem, followed by men with eyes covered in dust and guilt. That day, the Sanhedrin lost not only a teacher, but the voice that softened the harshness of the law. Gamaliel stood throughout the entire ceremony. He did not weep. His rigid face belied the trembling heart within. Hillel's death was not merely an end. It was the beginning of the burden that now fell on his shoulders. Without his grandfather, he was summoned to occupy the central seat in the judgments. The council chamber with its high walls and olive wood panels felt colder than before. The eyes that once turned to Hillel now turned to him, but not with reverence, rather with scrutiny. He was young. He had the name but not the time, the inheritance but not yet the authority. The house of Shammai seized the moment. Their followers demanded rigidity, exemplary punishment for transgressors, definitive separations between pure and impure. The voices of moderation without Hillel were scattered. And then came the test. 2 women were brought before the Sanhedrin, accused of adultery. According to the law, they deserved death, but the stories were full of doubt. One claimed violence, the other confessed remorse. The council was divided, shouting veiled insults, white-bearded men who had forgotten mercy. Gamaliel remained silent until the debates ended. When all had spoken, he stood. The law is not a sword to punish, but a lamp to illuminate. If it is cut off from compassion, it blinds rather than guides. The murmuring was immediate. Shammai, older and unyielding, gave him a steely look. And when the light fails, young Gamaliel, what remains but the blade? Gamaliel felt his heart race but did not retreat. When the light fails, it is because men have hidden it, not God. In the end, by a narrow vote, the women's lives were spared. They were expelled from the city, but not stoned. Blood did not stain the ground, but it stained Gamaliel's name among the strict. That night, upon returning home, he found his door marked with charcoal, a symbol of reproach. Someone had told him without words that he had betrayed the purity of the law. He knelt, not in fear, but in exhaustion. He remembered his grandfather's words who once told him, "He who applies the Torah with hatred rips out its soul, but he who applies it with reverence gives it flesh and blood." But now it was he who had to choose daily between the weight of tradition and the breath of justice. Every decision would be a wound, every concession a suspicion. And yet within his heart he felt that the true law, the living and pulsing one, did not cry out for blood, but for truth, a truth he might not yet fully understand. While Jerusalem slept, Gamaliel stayed awake. The silence was thick, but within him something stronger than doubt began to take form: conviction. If this content touched you in any way, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and share it with someone who also needs to hear this. Your support strengthens this mission. Now, let's continue our journey through the pages of this story. Train up a child in the way he should go. Proverbs 226. The day began with wind carrying sand from the north. The steps of the Damascus gate were covered in dust when Gamaliel arrived at the school. He was expected to judge a newly translated manuscript from the diaspora, but his attention shifted the moment he heard a strange voice among the students. It was firm, eager, and carried the accent of the Cilician coast. The young man spoke about the Torah with an almost fierce passion, quoting passages from memory with precision, challenging even the most experienced with his unyielding logic. His name, Saul of Tarsus. Gamaliel approached, unnoticed. The young man with piercing eyes and a furrowed brow was questioning a traditional reading of Deuteronomy with such boldness that the others exchanged glances, unsure whether it was courage or insolence. "Who is your teacher?" Gamaliel interrupted, breaking the circle of listeners. Saul turned, not retreating. "My father taught me the basics, the books taught me the rest. And reverence I learned from God's silence." The answer, instead of sounding arrogant, came across as a confessed wound. Gamaliel looked at him again, this time with interest. It was like staring at a broken mirror. There were signs of brilliance, but also sharp edges. That same day, he invited Saul for a more private meeting. In the shadow of the library's columns among stacks of papyri and scrolls, they began a dialogue that would last for years. Gamaliel offered him no status, no titles, only questions. Strength without wisdom kills, but wisdom without passion falls asleep. "You have the fire, Saul. You need the structure." Saul accepted, and so began a relationship that would shape the destiny of both and the world. In the months that followed, the young man from Tarsus absorbed teachings like someone drinking water after a desert crossing. His mind was sharp, his zeal blazing. Gamaliel took him to Sanhedrin sessions as an observer. With each debate, each judgment, he saw in Saul the same restlessness he had once felt in himself, but multiplied, intensified by nearly uncontrollable zeal. Some masters warned Gamaliel, "He is like a sword forged too quickly," but Gamaliel did not withdraw. Something about Saul seemed predestined, as if God were breathing over invisible embers. One afternoon, after long hours of studying the law of Moses, Saul asked a direct question. "What would you do, Master, if someone threatened the purity of the Torah with heresies and false messiahs?" Gamaliel hesitated. He saw the followers of the Nazarene growing in number and fervor. Though he disagreed with them, he did not see them as an immediate threat, not as others did. "Discerning wheat from weeds is not the work of a sword," he replied. "It is the work of time." Saul said nothing, but his eyes shone with something more than agreement: conviction. Gamaliel felt a chill, not because of what was said, but because of the silence that followed that night. In his study scrolls, he wrote, "Zeal is necessary, but it must be shepherded, for unrestrained fire burns the altar." But it was already too late. The fire was burning, and it had a name: Saul. "And when your children ask you, 'What does this ceremony mean to you?' you shall say," Exodus 12:26-27. The streets of Jerusalem bustled with pilgrims. It was the week of Passover. Lambs were being prepared, bitter herbs crushed, tables carefully set. In the finest homes, the ritual was meticulously followed. Amid it all, Gamaliel walked through the alleys of the upper city with a heavy heart and scattered thoughts. He should have been at peace. The feast recalled the deliverance from Egypt, the triumph of blood over slavery. But there was something in the air. Murmurs as nervous whispers among merchants and scholars. A name was beginning to circulate, wrapped in fear and fascination: Yeshua the Galilean. They said he healed the blind, multiplied bread, taught with authority without ever studying under the rabbis. They also said he criticized the Pharisees. Some called him a prophet, others a threat. That night during the Seder, Gamaliel was at the house of a noble priest. The elders recited the ritual questions. Children responded, and the men smiled as they recounted the Exodus. But the name surfaced again, this time plainly. He entered the temple. Gamaliel said, one guessed vinegar on his lips. He overturned the money changers' tables, called us whitewashed tombs. Silence fell like a blade over the wine. Gamaliel frowned. They say even demons submit to him, whispered another, half mocking, half afraid. They say he claims to be the Son of the Most High, added a third. Gamaliel said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the cup before him. Something tightened in his chest as if an ancient premonition wanted to surface. He didn't know this. Yeshua had never seen him. But those words, whitewashed tombs, struck hard as if spoken to him, too. At the end of the banquet, he walked alone among the temple's outer columns. The full moon lit the steps where decades earlier he had heard his grandfather teach. And now there was a new teacher, a Galilean, who dared to confront everything. He recalled Isaiah's prophecy. No beauty or majesty to attract us, despised and rejected by men. Could it be that this was the one foretold, or just another deluded man like so many others? The next morning, the temple was filled with visitors. Confused priests, murmuring Levites, Roman soldiers watching from afar. Gamaliel heard from servants that Yeshua had vanished after entering and leaving the city on a young donkey, too prophetic a gesture to ignore in the heart of the Sanhedrin. Debate raged. Some demanded immediate arrest, others called for surveillance. Gamaliel remained silent. Inside him, something resonated, a mix of unease and an inner voice that said, listen before judging. At the end of the week, he withdrew in fasting, not by command, but by necessity. He had doubts, many, and for the first time in years, he felt small before what he did not understand. The name Yeshua would not leave his mind. There was no proof, no doctrine, only a growing discomfort, as if tradition were being visited by something older than itself. Blasphemy. Why do we still need witnesses? Matthew 26-65. The council chamber was filled with a tension that not even centuries of Torah could silence. Hardened faces, agitated robes, voices whispered like sharp blades. The Sanhedrin had convened on an unusual night, not by the calendar, but by fear. Gamaliel arrived late. The rumor had already spread like dry fire. The Galilean had been arrested, betrayed by one of his own. They took him, they said, under the pale glow of torches, like hunting a lurking criminal. At the center of the council, Yeshua stood unchained, unarrogant. His eyes searched those judging him without defense, but also without pleading. Gamaliel looked at him from afar. The discomfort he had felt in previous days now became presence. It was him there, alive. The priests sought witnesses, but their testimonies contradicted each other. One said he spoke against the temple, another that he proclaimed himself king. Nothing aligned, and yet the trial continued as if the sentence had already been written. Caiaphas, the high priest, rose. By the living God, I charge you. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? Silence tore through the air. Yeshua answered firmly without raising his voice. You have said it, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. A murmur rose like a storm. Caiaphas tore his robes, a gesture that sealed the accusation. Blasphemy. What more do we need? Gamaliel did not rise, did not speak. He simply felt the ground give way beneath his feet. This was not a trial, it was a ritualized execution. And yet, there he was, a member of the Sanhedrin, watching in silence. The guards' hands dragged Yeshua roughly. Some spat in his face. One of the elders muttered a psalm under his breath. Another made a hand gesture, avoiding the Nazarene's eyes. Gamaliel remained motionless in his chest. Two voices waged war. The voice of the institution he had sworn to protect, and the voice of an ancient breath that told him something here was not right. On his way out, he stopped before a column and leaned his forehead against the cold stone. He remembered Isaiah's words. He remembered Saul's questions. He remembered Hillel's grandson, who now saw himself as a spectator of a sacred injustice. Hours later, upon hearing of the condemnation, he remained silent. When one of the elders came to get his signature on the ruling, he simply withdrew his hand. I did not agree, but I did not stop it either. The next morning, Jerusalem was eerily quiet, as if the city had lost something it never knew it had. Gamaliel descended alone to the lower part of the temple. He washed his face in silence. On his way back up, a young scribe whispered, "They killed him like a thief." But he didn't scream. Gamaliel didn't reply. He just walked. A name grew in his mind, a name no one else dared to say. Yeshua, the forbidden name. Not finding the body, they came back amazed, saying they had seen a vision of angels. Luke 24:23. It was morning when the rumors began. Faint, uncertain, but swift. In the marketplace, among sacks of wheat and dried dates, someone whispered, "The tomb is empty." Soon the news spread through squares, alleys, even the temple corridors. The Galilean's body had disappeared. Gamaliel was at the scribe school when he heard a pale young student interrupted the reading to whisper in his ear. He did not react. He simply closed the Torah scroll slowly, as if trying to delay the moment he would have to face the new chaos. In the Sanhedrin, unrest was visible. Some said the disciples had stolen the body. Others spoke of angels. A more enraged group demanded the rumors be silenced with punishment. The name Yeshua was spoken again, but now in fear. "This is sorcery," exclaimed one elder. "It's theater," said another. "Just another act by his followers." Gamaliel remained silent, but within him something stirred. It wasn't faith, not yet, it was doubt. And to him doubt was more dangerous than heresy. In the dead of night he covered his face and went out alone. He descended the slope to the eastern part of the city where tombs were carved into stone like silent mouths. The wind blew cold. The city slept, but he did not. He knew the way. A Sanhedrin servant had described it, albeit under threat. There was the tomb. The stone rolled away. No soldiers, no sign, only silence. A silence that screamed. Gamaliel approached hesitant. The interior was dark. Carefully he leaned at the entrance and closed his eyes. He breathed in the cave's cold air and felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It was a weight, the kind that doesn't come from outside, but from within. He remembered his grandfather's words. The veil of the temple separates man from God, but there are veils man weaves with his own hands. And now they said that at the exact moment the Galilean breathed his last, the sanctuary's veil was torn from top to bottom. Gamaliel hadn't seen it, but he had heard and he believed because the veil was also being torn within him. The next day, the Sanhedrin issued a statement. The body was taken by his disciples, an official version, clean, convenient, but false. Gamaliel returned home and locked himself away with his manuscripts. He wrote a single line. If he is alive, it is not the body that is missing. It is the blindness that remains. And there he stayed in silence like the tomb, a man among veils, some torn, others yet to be. If this counsel or this work is of men, it will be overthrown. But if it is of God, you will not be able to stop it. Acts 5:38-39. The Sanhedrin was packed. The elders murmured. The Levites avoided looking directly at the accused, and the accused, simple men in dirty clothes and with eyes on fire, remained silent, as if they had already won, even on the brink of death. Gamaliel observed everything from his seat. A chill ran up his spine, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. There was something in those men's eyes that disarmed him. It was the same silence he had felt at the empty tomb. Peter, John, and the others had been arrested for preaching in the temple. They had been warned, flogged, but they returned and preached again. They spoke boldly, unafraid of the sword or scorn. The high priest stood. "We commanded you not to speak in this name, but you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching. You want to bring that man's blood upon us." That man, they never said the name. The name still burned in many mouths. Peter stepped forward, his voice firm, cut through the chamber. "We must obey God rather than men." The murmuring grew. Some elders rose from their seats, fists clenched, mouths cried out for death. The same cry heard days earlier at the Nazarene's trial. They were ready. Stones already weighed heavy in their hearts. Gamaliel felt time suspend. The sound of shouting grew distant. He saw Yeshua's face. He saw the empty tomb. He saw the torn veil. And then he rose. A strange silence fell over the chamber. He was not a man who spoke without cause. When he spoke, the Sanhedrin listened. "Men of Israel, consider carefully what you are about to do to these men." Everyone fell silent. Gamaliel walked slowly to the center where the light from the high windows cast sharp shadows on the floor. Others have risen before them. Judas, the Galilean. They had followers and all perished. Their works of men crumbled like sand. He paused. His gaze scanned every face. "But if this plan is from God, you will not be able to stop it. You may even be found fighting against God himself." Silence, dense, irrefutable. It was not an argument. It was a breath of mercy, a crack in the wall of hatred. The elders' fury gave way. Reluctantly, they accepted Gamaliel's word. The apostles would be flogged, but not killed. Later in the empty corridors, a scribe approached. "Why did you defend them, Master?" Gamaliel didn't answer immediately. He looked to the sky as if waiting for an answer from above. "Because I heard no lie in them, and I've heard too many lies already." That night he wrote one more line in the scroll he kept hidden. "Stones weigh heavier when the righteous are silenced." The phrase, "let them be," would echo for centuries. But for Gamaliel it was only the beginning of his most intimate struggle between the zeal of the law and the whisper of truth. The room was small, stuffy, and the air was heavy with hidden intentions. Gamaliel had been summoned to a private meeting with influential members of the house of Shammai, his old rivals now bolder since Hillel's death. The mood was not conciliatory but judgmental. "Your voice has been too soft," said the eldest among them. "The Sanhedrin hesitates because you hesitate." Gamaliel crossed his arms beneath his cloak. He didn't respond right away. He knew every word from then on would carry a cost. The men before him weren't seeking dialogue. They demanded submission. "Your gestures in defense of those fishermen are a dangerous precedent," added another. "The Torah does not waver. Mercy when blind becomes betrayal." He stood slowly. "The Torah also commands us to love justice, but justice without discernment is cruelty disguised as zeal." The tension was thick in the air. The men looked at each other but did not back down. The followers of Shammai were gaining strength behind the scenes of the temple, in the markets, in the lesser councils. They were harsher, more demanding, and perhaps for that reason, more popular among those who craved security in unstable times. In the following days, Gamaliel became the target of public murmuring. On the temple steps, he heard his name questioned. In the schools, some teachers refused to cite his teachings. It was as if slowly his authority was being corroded from within, not by heresy, but by daring not to wound. In his home, the stillness crushed him. The scrolls on the table felt heavier. The memory of his grandfather, Hillel, surfaced in every decision. Hillel the moderate, Hillel the patient. But now the world was cruel, and Gamaliel no longer knew if the voice of reason had a place among the screams. After a hearing where he was publicly challenged, he heard one of Shammai's students shout, "The time for gentleness has passed. The sword must teach what compassion failed to." Gamaliel stopped. His eyes turned to the young man who did not flinch. For the first time, he felt fragile among his own. The balance he tried to maintain slipped through his fingers like sand. That night he visited the western wall. He hid in the shadows where no one could see him, and he wept. "Lord," he murmured, "if loving justice makes me weak, then give me another weakness. But do not let the law become a hammer in the hands of the impatient." The next day, climbing the Sanhedrin stairs, he noticed something new. He was no longer feared, not by Shammai, not by his own, and that strangely brought him peace. He had chosen not for power but for peace, and he knew it would cost him everything. But still he chose, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." Acts 7:60. The crowd closed in a semicircle like a necklace of stones, and it was no metaphor. The hands carried real stones, hands of the law, hands of those sworn to defend purity, hands that had vowed to uphold the Torah, and now were about to crush a man with it. Gamaliel should not have been there, not officially, but he knew. Someone had told him that Stephen, one of the Galileans' disciples, would be tried for blasphemy. And more than tried, sentenced. The tension was nearly unbearable. Stephen, on his knees with his face covered in dust, did not seem afraid. He spoke with firmness, eyes lifted to heaven as if seeing something the others could not. He accused the leaders of resisting the Spirit of God. He cited the prophets. He exposed the sins of the nation like someone tearing a veil before the people. The shouting began, not in rebuttal, but in hatred. They covered their ears, rushed at him. Gamaliel, frozen at the back, could not speak. He watched the men tear their garments, an ancient rite of wrath and condemnation. He saw the stones raised and then the cry, "I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." The first stone struck his shoulder, the second his face. The body collapsed, but his mouth still moved. He prayed, not for himself, for them. "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." The silence after the last stone was sharper than the screams. The men panted. The dust settled. Stephen lay still. Gamaliel did not move, his eyes fixed on the bloodied body. In that moment, he realized what he didn't want to admit. The justice he had taught had become a weapon in the hands of the intolerant. As he left, he looked at no one. Walked alone through the alleys of Jerusalem with Stephen's prayer echoing in his mind. That night brought no sleep. Sitting before a lamp, he scribbled disordered words. How can the eyes of the law not see the injustice they commit? How can light blind? The nights that followed, he awoke to the sound of stones. Imagined stones, stones in the soul. Stephen's face.com in the midst of pain grew clearer in his memory, and a question arose, increasingly disturbing. If Stephen died by mistake, how many others will die the same? The streets of Jerusalem boiled more with fear than fervor. The followers of the way, as the disciples of the crucified Galilean were called, began to disappear. Some arrested, others stoned, and those who escaped fled silently, as if knowing that death now walked faceless through the alleys. At the center of this storm stood one man, Saul of Tarsus, former disciple of Gamaliel, now the Sanhedrin, fiery voice and relentless hand. He marched with soldiers, stormed homes, dragged men and women to the courts. His face bore a fury that went beyond doctrine. It was personal, as if he wanted to fix the world with his own hands. Gamaliel watched it all from a distance. There was no seat harder than that of the conscience. In public he remained silent. He didn't confront him. The council already saw him as weak. Any defense of the way would now be seen as open betrayal. But in secret he suffered. Every name listed, every door broken, every muffled cry and prisoned silence was a wound in him too. He remembered Saul as a young man, asking questions, challenging boundaries, thirsting for truth. Now he saw him wielding truth like a hammer. One afternoon they crossed paths in the temple corridors. Saul, his robe stained with dust, eyes tense, breathed like one who had been running. "Master," he said with restrained reverence, "I've obtained authorization. I'm going to Damascus. The Nazarenes' followers are spreading, but they won't escape." Gamaliel did not respond immediately. He looked at the ground, then at his disciple's face. "Saul, be careful that in fighting the darkness, you are not consumed by it." Saul frowned but said nothing. He simply nodded and walked away. That night, Gamaliel wrote in his private scroll, "The disciple's zeal may become the master's wound, but the master's silence may become heaven's wound." Reports of the persecution came quickly. Families separated, scrolls burned, leaders imprisoned. The city murmured. The cries were in the walls, even when no one spoke. Gamaliel began walking alone, often hooded. The teachers of Shammai's house now smiled at his silence, thinking he had finally yielded. But what he carried was not consent. It was guilt. because deep down he knew it was not the Sanhedrin that unleashed the iron hand. It was him when he stayed silent, when he didn't teach, when he failed to warn. Are you enjoying what you've heard so far? Then don't forget, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others. That helps us take this message even further. Let's return to the story and discover what happens. Suddenly, a light from heaven flashed around him. Acts 9:3. The news came first as a whisper, then as a scandal. A messenger from the synagogue in Jerusalem, pale and confused, ran into the scribe's courtyard. Saul vanished in Damascus. Gamaliel lifted his eyes from the scroll. The name until then had been heavy, but now it hurt. The young man he had raised, instructed, watched burn with zeal, had now disappeared. In the middle of his mission, at the height of his fury without a trace, in the following days, rumors spread like fire through dry leaves. They said he had been blinded, that he heard a voice from the heavens, that he fell to the ground as if dead. Some said he had gone mad. Others that he had seen the Nazarene himself. Gamaliel didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. But when letters came from Damascus confirming that the persecutor was now preaching the same faith he once tried to destroy, the silence in Jerusalem was one of shock. Gamaliel withdrew not to the school nor the Sanhedrin but to a small study room away from the temple. For days he received no visitors, he only read and wrote. The words he once whispered to himself now found ink and leather. How can a man change so quickly? How can a blind man see? And those who see remain blind. The memories returned. Saul as a young man, his sharp questions, his eyes gleaming at the scriptures, the last time he saw him before the trip to Damascus, with haste in his steps and fury in his gaze, and now preaching a part of Gamaliel revolted. It was dangerous, confusing, scandalous, but another part deeper, older, trembled, because if it were true, if the light had really found him on the road, then something far greater was unfolding, something neither the Sanhedrin nor the Romans nor even the disciples fully understood. On the sixth night, he lit the lamp. He wrote a short prayer unlike any before. If it is your light, do not hide it from me. 2. Do not let me stray from the way just because I know the scrolls. The next morning he dressed in silence, went to the temple, walked past the columns where he had once debated with the teachers of the law. He stopped at the entrance and closed his eyes. He said nothing, but something inside him was finally starting to break. The fire burned in a side courtyard of the temple, but it wasn't sacrifice nor incense. It was destruction. The Sanhedrin had ordered all records of the trials related to the Nazarene's followers to be burned. Names, dates, accusations, all devoured by the flames, as if erasing the paper could erase history. Gamaliel watched from a distance, hidden under his cloak. The scrolls crackled as they burned. Scrolls he himself had signed, verdicts he had witnessed in silence. Memories now consumed like straw. They said it was necessary that the records weakened the authority of the Sanhedrin, that feeding the past gave weapons to the apostles, that silence would be the law's best defense. But he knew it wasn't silence. It was fear. In the dead of night, Gamaliel returned to the hidden archive of Hillel's school. The lamp's flame trembled as he rummaged through the scrolls. He found 3 fragments bearing the council's seal, excerpts from Stephen's trial, a partial transcription of Peter's speech, a marginal note mentioning the name of Yeshua as the transgressor of the temple. With trembling hands, he hid them in a wooden compartment under the floor. He placed old Torah scrolls on top as if protecting the truth with scripture itself. It's not rebellion, he whispered to himself. It's memory. Days later, he was summoned to sign a new edict, the public condemnation of Saul as a traitor to the Jewish faith. The document was already written. It only lacked the seal of a prestigious name. His Gamaliel refused. The scribes looked at him in disbelief. Master, you've always served the integrity of the house. Why hesitate now? He answered calmly. Because I've burned with the fire of men. I won't now erase with ink. It was the first time. His refusal stirred more than murmurs. He was threatened, quietly isolated, lost his seat in 2 judgments, but he did not yield. That night he returned to the floorboards, retrieved the hidden fragments, read them again in a low voice. Stephen's words felt more alive, Yeshua's name heavier, Peter's speech less insane, more urgent, and then he wrote in dark ink, the embers of memory burn hotter than the flames of censorship. He stored the scroll. He didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but he knew that truth doesn't burn like papyrus. O God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. Psalm 63:1. The Judean sun was unforgiving. The sand burned the feet even through thick sandals, and the dry wind seemed to strip the very memory of silence from the stones. Gamaliel walked slowly, covered in dust, far from everything. The Sanhedrin, the schools, the trials, the names and the cries. He needed to silence the world to hear himself, or perhaps something older than himself. In the caves where prophets once hid, where scenes left their words buried, Gamaliel found shelter. There, under the dark cloak of solitude, he spread out his scrolls, Torah, prophets, Psalms, and he read, not as a teacher, as a man. Each morning he prayed with dry eyes, prayer without form, without liturgy, only thirst for an answer. If Yeshua was not the Messiah, why such fear of his name? He murmured. If Stephen lied, why did his death bring peace? And if Saul went mad, why do his words now echo louder than ours? The desert's silence did not respond, but neither did it abandon him. At night he lay on stones. The sky was vaster there, and in dreams he saw flashes. Stephen's face bloodied, repeating his last phrase. Saul's gaze. Now Paul's preaching not with hatred, but with faith, and he saw himself in standing before a torn veil, not knowing if he should cross. One day he found an old Essene scroll. A passage commented on Isaiah's promise of the suffering servant. The words seemed written for that time. He was despised, and we did not esteem him, led like a lamb to the slaughter. Gamaliel pressed the text to his chest and wept, not for knowing the truth, but for no longer being able to deny it with the same fervor as before. On the 12th day he wrote, "When the echo of death brings more life than recited psalms, perhaps God is speaking outside the synagogues." On the 22nd, beard grown and eyes hollow, he walked to a nearby hill. He looked toward Jerusalem. It was just a blur on the horizon, but he felt it pulsing. He knew he would have to return, that he couldn't live among rocks forever, but he would return changed, because in the desert he didn't find answers. He found thirst, and that thirst now would guide him more than any doctrine. The pen moves hesitantly over the parchment. The stroke is not steady, the words cautious. There is no addressee at the top, just a blank space, as if the name were too heavy to write. Gamaliel is alone. The lamplight dances on the chamber walls where he now spends his days. The school is silent. The temple corridors feel increasingly distant. Not in physical distance, but in a distance. He writes, "Saul, my son." Pause. The name no longer sounds the same. He now answers to Paul, and no longer walks beneath the Sanhedrin columns, but among the Gentiles, those who never learned to kneel to read the Torah. You have done what no one dared. You preach with fervor. You suffer as a martyr. Perhaps you believe more now than when you listened to me in your youth. I do not recognize you, and yet I do. Gamma stops, lowers the pen, runs his hands over his eyes. The warmth of fresh parchment still rises to his nose, a strange scent of truth written in pain. He remembers the first lessons. Saul with fiery eyes, the sharp questions, the way he defended the law as if it were a sword. Now he preaches a crucified Messiah, a scandal, a heresy to many, but no longer to Gamaliel. I still do not know if I see him as you do, but I know that since him nothing is static, not the world, not me. The letter continues, page after page, a silent confession. I regret not having restrained you sooner, but I regret even more not having followed you later. At the end, he rolls the parchment carefully, seals it with a linen cord. He writes no name, sends no messenger. He simply opens a small cedar box where he keeps old writings, fragments, rescued from fire notes only he understands. There he places the letter and closes it, not out of cowardice but because some words are only to be read at the right time or by eyes no longer in this world. As he rises, he breathes deeply. For the first time in a long while, he does not feel sinful for admiring one who crossed the line. He feels longing not for Paul, but for Saul, the young man who believed he could change the world, and in some way did at the door. He looks back one last time and says quietly, "One day perhaps you will read this." Then stood there up one in the council, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, honored by all the people. Acts 5:34. The hall was filled with hardened faces, faces he had known for decades, some shaped under his instruction, others molded by disputes that long ago ceased to be theological and became battles for institutional survival. Gamaliel, now with graying hair and slower steps, had been called to an extraordinary session of the Sanhedrin. The reason was always the same. The followers of the Nazarene, but the tone was more urgent. They wanted a final sentence. No more warnings, no more floggings. Death. He sat in silence, listening to the arguments. "They grow like weeds," said one. "They cross borders, subvert households, preach among the Gentiles," said another. One of them healed at the temple gate and then attributed it to the name of Yeshua, added a third disgust on his face. The final accusation fell like a stone. "They are repeat blasphemers, and for that there is no more mercy." The Sanhedrin was ready. The votes would be counted within minutes. Gamaliel did not speak. Not this time. He rose in silence. His cloak swayed gently with the movement. He crossed the hall with firm though unhurried steps. The elders turned to him, expecting his word. Perhaps one last defense, another attempt at moderation, but it didn't come. He stopped at the edge of the door, looked at them all. His eyes said more than his words ever could. They were the eyes of one who bore the weight of decisions, of omissions, of cries never voiced and stones never thrown, but which nonetheless had come too close, and then he left. No argument, no vote, no confrontation. His absence was his protest, his departure, his final lesson. In the outer corridor, a young scribe ran after him. "Master, aren't you going to state your position?" Gamaliel paused for a moment, looked up at the sky between the temple columns, took a deep breath, and replied, "My position is to walk away while I can still walk without staining my feet." That night the council records marked his absence as abstention, but those who knew him understood. It was a renunciation. In the solitude of his home, he wrote nothing that day, nor did he pray, nor read. He simply sat before a worn wooden table, lit a lamp, and stared at the flame, because sometimes truth needs no further preaching. Sometimes it is enough for a man to walk away while everyone else stays behind. Time had veiled Gamaliel in its own shroud. The eyes once attentive to the fine details of the law were now clouded, burning in the light. His vision faded, not as punishment, but as the result of a long road, walked under the weight of conscience. On the streets, a few still revered him. To the younger generation, he was just an old name, a master too mild for an era of harshness. Some whispered that he had strayed. Others called him a coward. Many simply forgot him, but he didn't blame them. Withdrawn in a modest house in the Oil district, Gamaliel spent his days among scrolls and fragments. His trembling hands still knew the path of sacred letters. With difficulty he copied portions of the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, and also fragments he had saved from the fire. Stephen's speeches, trial notes, rabbinic reflections, the new leaders preferred to erase. With each word written, he felt he was preserving more than scrolls. He was preserving memory. Because where there is forgetfulness, injustice disguises itself as justice. Sometimes he received visits from young students, curious or rebellious enough not to fear his name. They sat silently watching him write. Some asked questions, others simply listened as he murmured scripture from memory, not as a teacher, but as one seeking comfort. "Master," one asked once, "why do you keep copying if almost no one reads?" Gamaliel smiled bitterly and replied, "Because perhaps one day, someone will read and understand and rescue what men lost out of fear of change." The aches of the body added to the pain of the soul, but there was a kind of peace in silence, the peace of one who no longer needs to prove anything. One who carries the weight of his choices and still walks even if no one sees. At dusk he sat at the doorway and let the wind touch his face. Sometimes he remembered the grandson of Hillel he once was, the young teacher who tried to balance law and compassion, the disciple he saw grow and darken, the Galilean he never met but never again forgot. One night, while reorganizing his manuscripts, he stumbled upon an old, nearly faded scroll. On it, a verse written in youthful strokes. "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Gamaliel closed his eyes. The darkness in his sight no longer frightened him because the light he needed most was already burning within. Smoke rose like a lament into the sky. Ash fell like black snow over Jerusalem. The once proud walls now gaped open in wounds, the air wry of blood, scorched stone, and broken promises. Gamaliel, covered in dust, walked with difficulty through the rubble. The temple was burning. The house of the holy had become a pea. Roman soldiers drunk on war and power continued to loot what little remained, and there wasn't much left. He staggered, supported by a staff, his nearly blind eyes weeping more from sorrow than smoke. The city that once trembled at the Torah now fell without fear, without honor, without remorse. He passed the threshold of the Holy of Holies, or what remained of it. The curtains were torn not by human hands but by fire. The altars shattered, the scrolls of the law trampled or stolen. Gamaliel fell to his knees among the ruins, his hands on the hot ground, his beard wet with tears, his body trembled. "Lord," he murmured, "was this what we learned your law for? To see it burned with the men who bore it?" The tears came without shame, not the tears of despair, but the tears of finality, of realizing that everything he had built, debated, taught, and protected now lay beneath smoldering debris. Beside him, a scribe was bleeding. Further ahead, a Levite tried to carry broken planks, and in the distance, a group of Christians, yes, them, prayed among the ruins. They did not seek stones, they sought comfort. Gamaliel watched in silence. Those he once tried to understand and later tried to forget were now there standing, praying while the priests fled or died. Josephus would later write that not even enemies would believe in such ruin unless they saw it with their own eyes. Gamaliel saw it and more. He felt it. Every fallen wall was a memory of a lesson, every ember an unspoken sentence, every scream a part of the law he tried to preserve now vanishing. But amid the ashes something strange happened. A child, perhaps the daughter of a Christian, approached and offered him water. Her hands were dirty, her eyes clear. Gamaliel accepted, drank slowly, and for the first time in a long while he smiled. Because while the temple fell, something still stood. Not the altar, not the Sanhedrin, but hope. Night fell quickly over the scarred land of Jerusalem. The silence among the ruins was only surface deep. Beneath it hid sobs, whispered prayers, and the wounded breath of those who remained. Gamaliel walked with dragging steps through what had once been a teaching courtyard. Now only scorched stones and shadows. He sought shelter. Maybe bread, maybe only meaning, but he found people. In a corner, under part of a fallen wall, a small group huddled around a nearly extinguished lamp. There were 5, 2 men, 2 women, and a child. Christians, it was clear from their tattered robes, the cloth strips covering wounds, and the words they spoke in prayer. "Yua, have mercy." He saw them before they noticed him. He could have reported them. Even without a formal Sanhedrin, there were still zealous men lurking. Reporting meant survival. It meant staying on the right side, but Gamaliel stayed. One of the men saw him. His eyes widened. "Master Gamaliel." The woman instinctively stood, shielding the child. The other man picked up a stone, but Gamaliel simply raised his hands, wordless. Then he sat down. The silence among them was heavy, and then sweet, because sometimes the greatest miracle is not healing, but not attacking. The youngest began to speak. He told how they had lost everything, how soldiers hunted them for speaking the forbidden name, how they had seen parents killed before their children, how they prayed and how they still prayed, and why do you keep going? asked a male horse. Because he lives, the woman replied, eyes wet. And if he lives, everything we suffer already has an answer. Simple words, but spoken with the strength of those who've passed through fire. Do you truly believe he will return? The eldest nodded. He defeated death. He will not return as a lamb. He will return as a judge. Gamaliel didn't answer, his eyes blurred by age and sorrow, filled with tears. That faith once called heresy now seemed purer than any speech he'd heard in the Sanhedrin. The woman offered him bread. He accepted, shared, and ate with them. No formal blessing was spoken. No psalm recited, but in that moment, something within him broke, or perhaps finally healed. He wept, not loudly, but deeply, not from shame, but from release. The man who once upheld the rigor of the law now shared bread with the wounded of grace. The one who had trained the persecutor now welcomed the persecuted. Before leaving, he wrote a line on his arm with charcoal. Blood cries out, but forgiveness speaks deeper. And that night, as he lay beneath a makeshift tent, he whispered to the sky, if the Messiah is him, then forgive this old Pharisee who took too long to see. If this video spoke to you, consider supporting our channel with a like, a subscription, and by sharing it with others. Small gestures that make a big difference. Now, we continue with the next part of the story. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. Romans 10:4. The scroll arrived, folded, wrapped in simple cloth without a name. It was delivered by a traveler from Caesarea who swore he received it from one of Paul's companions, the former Saul, the former disciple. The messenger didn't know to whom he was delivering it, nor what it contained. He only said, it's from him. He said one day you would understand. Gamaliel delayed opening it. He spent hours gazing at the cloth, as if the touch itself carried a secret. Finally, with trembling fingers and eyes nearly defeated by age, he untied the knots. The leather revealed letters drawn with strength, rudimentary Greek, but clear. And there, in a faint voice, he began to read. Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. Gamaliel's voice trembled. He continued, for I can testify about them that they are zealous for God, but their zeal is not based on knowledge. Each word seemed to speak directly to him, as if Paul across the sea still called him master, but now corrected him. Since they did not know the righteousness of God and sought to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. Gamaliel paused. His eyes welled with tears. He recalled debates in the Sanhedrin, the cries against the disciples, the rulings driven by fear rather than truth. And he read on now more softly. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. Silence. No more noise in his mind, only the echo. He placed the scroll in his lap. The wood creaked under his weight. He took a deep breath. Everything he had learned, taught, defended, now rested on one single phrase. The end of the law, not as annulment but as fulfillment. He closed his eyes. He felt something tear within, not his faith, the shell around it, the rigid structure that had kept him from seeing further. He wasn't losing God. He was finding him in a new way. The same God, now with a human face, a wounded voice, and pierced hands. He stood with effort, went to the table, and opened an old Torah scroll. Read again the words he had loved so much. I am the Lord your God. Then he returned to Paul's scroll, not to compare but to complete. That evening he wrote something in his journal for the last time. It wasn't faith I lacked. It was the courage to let it grow. And as he stepped outside before sunset, he found a boy at the door, the son of one of the Christians he had welcomed days earlier. Master, where are you going? Gamaliel smiled to the way. The pen dipped slowly into the dark ink. The lamplight flickered with every breath, and the silence of the house felt deeper than ever. Gamaliel was writing not in a public scroll, nor in doctrinal record, but in a letter, the last one. The parchment was simple, but the words heavy, not from a teacher but from a man broken and whole at the same time. To Saul of Tarsus, now called Paul. For the first time he accepted the new name without irony, without hesitation. My son, perhaps you will never read this letter. Perhaps wind or men will silence it before it reaches you. But still I write because some truths, even unread, must be spoken. The next lines were not theological nor political. They were intimate, laden with memory. I remember your youth, your thirst for the law, your sacred fury. I was your guide, but I failed to listen when we should have heard. I saw the Galilean but judged him without knowing. You persecuted him but found him. Gamaliel paused. His clouded eyes blinked to maintain focus. His hand trembled, but kept writing. You went beyond what I could teach, and where I feared to go. You went. The grace you preached did not destroy the law. It revealed it. Ink stained his fingers. A familiar scent of leather and wood filled the room. But within him, something new was born. Freedom. Today I understand that not every son must repeat the father's steps. Some must surpass them. And you, Saul, you did. Not with pride, but with blood. And for that, I call you my son. The letter ended with no formal closing, just the quiet seal of a man who was no longer the same. Gamaliel rolled the letter with care. He called a young student, the same who had helped him copy texts in recent weeks. Deliver this if you can, but if you don't find the one it's for, keep it. The boy looked into the old master's eyes and nodded. Moved, Gamaliel didn't watch him leave. He remained seated, hands in his lap, heart light. On the wall an old Torah scroll hung. Beside it, Paul's scroll. Both breathed, both spoke, and between them Gamaliel, a bridge between worlds. He didn't know if the letter would arrive, but he knew the words had been spoken, and they sealed the legacy. In peace, I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Psalm 4:8. Music. The lamp burned softly on the table. Its flame, small and steady, cast dancing shadows on the walls. The silence in the house was complete. There were no voices, no movement, only the calm breathing of an old man who, after so many years, was finally ready to rest. Gamaliel sat with a curved spine, his clouded eyes fixed on a point no one else could see. In his hands an old scroll, Psalms. The ink had faded, the edges were worn by time. But that passage, that one he knew by heart. In peace I will lie down and sleep, he whispered softly. There was no urgency in his voice, no despair, only surrender. The room was the same where he had written his last letters. Hidden fragments welcomed wounded Christians. It was the same place that over time ceased to be exile and became an altar. Beside the table rested two open scrolls. To the left, the Torah. To the right, the parchment with Paul's words. Both spoke of a God who calls. Both revealed a path, one through law, the other through grace. Gamaliel no longer needed to choose between them, not because he confused them, but because he understood that one had fulfilled the other. Outside, the wind gently tapped the wooden walls. The city beyond continued as best it could, partially rebuilt, partly shattered, but the world inside that room was whole. Slowly he rose, walked to the door, opened it. The starry sky bathed his wrinkled face in the night's light. Lord of time, he said, his voice steady, despite age. I was your servant, even when I mistook what it meant to serve you. He closed the door, returned to the table, sat before the flame. He took a fragment of parchment and with his pen wrote a single line. I was a Pharisee. I was a teacher, but in the end I was found. He lay down in silence on a simple mat, his hands crossed over his chest, his face serene, his eyes still open, but without urgency. No shadow of doubt remained in them. And there, as the lamp's wick flickered for the last time, Gamaliel closed his eyes, not in fear, but in peace. The peace he had spent a lifetime trying to understand. Decades had passed since the destruction. Jerusalem was different. The columns raised under Roman rule tried to erase the scars, but the winds still carried ancient names. Among them, one hardly spoken anymore. Gamaliel, in a forgotten corner of the old school of Hillel, a young scribe, searched through the archives. He sought old scrolls for copying and teaching, but found something unexpected. A dark wooden box, sealed, hidden beneath planks loosened, either by chance or providence. Inside, manuscripts tied with faded ribbons. Some sheets were worn by time, others intact as he opened them. The words revealed not laws but confessions, reflections, testimonies. If he is alive, it's not the body that's missing. It's the blindness that remains. It wasn't faith I lacked, it was the courage to let it grow. I was a Pharisee, I was a teacher, but in the end I was found. The young man read in silence. Each phrase pulled him into a time he had never lived, but that now pulsed before his eyes. It was as if Gamaliel, the teacher of the law, spoke there, not from a pulpit, but from the depths of a surrendered soul. The hidden letters, including the one to Paul, were there, not sealed, not sent, but alive. The scribe didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to return them to silence, fearing accusations of heresy, but another part, deeper, whispered, these words need to breathe. With reverence he began to copy line by line. He changed nothing, he interpreted nothing, he simply preserved. Over time Gamaliel's fragments began to circulate among a few silent scholars, hidden Christians, restless Jews, not as doctrine, but as an echo. Years later a teacher would quote one of his lines in a rural synagogue. In another province, a follower of Yeshua would use his words to introduce a hymn. And in Rome, a converted centurion would keep among his belongings a nearly unreadable copy of a passage attributed to the old rabbi. There were no monuments, no known tomb, no mention in the epistles, no public praise. But in every corner where grace found space between the stones of the law, the name Gamaliel re-emerged, not as authority but as a seed. A man who dared to listen when others shouted, who dared to be silent when the system demanded fury, who dared to change not through power but through forgiveness. And so what began in another's shadow, Hillel's, became quiet light among those who came after. Gamaliel was gone, but his transformation remained on paper and in eternity. Don't forget to check out the next stories now showing on your screen. Click and dive even deeper into the hidden truths of Scripture. Thank you for walking with us this far. May this journey live on in you. We'll meet again in the next chapter. See you soon.